Just quickly, I want to introduce both Tracie and Adam. Tracie's had over 2 decades of experience in the analytics industry, delivering solutions for Fortune 1000 companies in the retail, sports, and high-tech space. She's focused on analytics driving enhanced personalization services and bolstering company growth. So it brings a wealth of experience there from Merkle, as well as her prior experience at Deloitte. Adam, it turns out, besides being the worldwide head of the media and entertainment data science and analytics team at Amazon Web Services, is a fellow undergraduate and graduate alumni of mine, which I just discovered. So
interesting.
Welcome,
right.
welcome. That was a rather interesting department there. But Adam's a senior seasoned executive within the media and entertainment industry with tenure at companies like the Discovery Channel, NPR, and National Geographic Channel, but joins us with his lead role focusing on things like machine learning and advanced analytics at Amazon Web Services. So welcome both of you, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
We can go, as we talked when we met earlier about this particular topic, we can go all kinds of directions with this, but I think I'd really like to lay out with the starting question talking about the post-COVID consumer. Although continue to stream content and purchase online, increased consumers' savings rates in particular, I think personally, indicate a pent-up demand for in-person entertainment and related products and services. And as we've heard from many of our speakers today, it's no simple task to gain insight on consumer behavior across so many distribution channels, online as well as in person. Many of those channels still operate, or many of the media and entertainment companies still operate more of a wholesale model in some of these channels. So they don't have access to, direct access to consumer data, yet our colleagues are expecting pervasive access to consumer analytics. So given this desire to get this 360 omni-channel view of consumer behavior and consumer consumption of entertainment, what are the challenges that companies are going to be facing when really trying to meet these expectations for this kind of broad set of analytics? Who'd like to start? Tracie?
Tracie,
Sure.
like to start? Okay.
Yeah, I'll start. That's fine. Can you hear me okay? Hopefully you can.
Perfect.
I'm good. So, I mean, the challenges are going to be, they're varied in different ways, right? I think I would categorize them in three big categories. One is the dealings with privacy and risk, right? So that's still a concern, and building trust with the consumer and being able to know that your brand has got this trusted relationship with the consumer, because that's what allows them to give permission. And then of course, the regulatory environment with the privacy and constraints that exist there is also going to be pivotal. So understanding what your risk portfolio looks like when you're dealing with the consumers, whether it's one-to-one and driving personalization, or you need to meet regulatory requirements, right? So that's kind of that one bucket, I would say, and I would loop those into one bucket around privacy and trust with the consumer as one. And then I think the other big piece is it kind of extends into that, where it's looking at how do you manage your own data when you are a media and entertainment organization, whether you have a direct connection to the consumer or it's an indirect connection to the consumer. How are you using the information that you have on hand, whether it's through that you know them as an audience member, right? Or you know them as a consumer where they're coming and, taking on, being a part of your entertainment event, and driving more digital connection with them. And how do you manage that to make it's more about the experience, so that you can actually understand and manage the data that you are able to capture, and the interactions you have with those consumers, make them more real, more relevant, so that it's a moment that matters to them, right? And then you can really truly start to develop a view of who they are to you and your brand or your event that you're bringing to life. And then the third area is like, what is the technology that you're using and the innovation that you're doing and bringing to the table to help solve this equation? And are you making the right investments at the right time to make that a meaningful moment really happen, to truly let your brand experience kind of resonate with the consumers that you do know, or those audiences that you're trying to reach.
Great.
Yeah.
Anna, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I would agree with all that. I would draw a through line on some of the things that you said, Tracie. A lot of those aspects of understanding the customer, understanding what they do where, and what they consume, as we just heard from the stars guest. At the end of the day, you mentioned, Nina, that traditionally a wholesale model, moving more to direct. Most media companies are by now have some sort of direct interaction, right?
Right.
And that is driving a bunch of expectation in terms of how do you react to the velocity of that direct to consumer reaction. But at a very high level, like a lot of these media companies are no longer competing on quality of content, breadth and depth of catalog. They're competing on the experience. Those other things are kind of table stakes. It's given that you're going to have good quality and that good content and a lot of it, but it's do I get to Tracie's point? Is it personalized? And personalization also applies to commercialization and monetization, by the way, in terms of quality of experience. Are the streams working, the quality, the QoS, the QoE type stuff? All of those things are a new skill set in some ways that these companies are going to have to adopt. And the fact that they are adopting to these and adapting to these drives the second point that Tracie was talking about, is the platform and the technology. Like I would just add that the correct technology and what correct means, in my perspective, is the right foundation with the ability to be flexible as need be, because this stuff changes so quickly. And you could be, you could go from being a broadcaster to an e-commerce player in 6 months. And is your platform flexible enough to take care of that?
Fabulous, fabulous. Well, Tracie, I think in particular, you alluded to some of the issues about data privacy. And I think this balance, at one point we had talked about the balance between data privacy and personalization. What are the things that companies are going to need to face and put into place to be able to deal with that?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One is, I think the brands and entertainment industry leaders need to, and who's delivering whatever media products in the market or entertainment products in the market, really need to work closely with their risk and privacy officers, or their CISOs, right? Because it's no longer just a security thing now. Risk, security, and privacy kind of all fit in that house. And having that relationship very early on and establishing a partnership is very critical to the success of the marketing teams and the media teams, to truly being able to do the right thing with the right moment and the right information at the right time, right? To prevent, not bad behavior, but bad things from happening, so to speak, right? So that, I think, creating that partnership dynamic with the internally is a very critical aspect of being able to successfully drive a personalization agenda. I think the other big piece is truly understanding in the personalization landscape. Personalization means different things for different consumers for whatever aspect of media and entertainment that they're dealing with, right? So really truly understanding what that needs to look like, the characteristics that the consumer expects of your brand or your entertainment group that you're bringing, and what you're bringing to them. Understanding what personalization really means and understanding the consumer in that context is super important. So your analytics and insights teams are pivotal to helping you truly gain insight to understanding and knowing the consumer better for whatever it is that they're engaging with you on. And so I think that's the second big critical piece. And any of those personalization programs that I have seen out there, whether you be a CPG brand or an entertainment brand, is truly, or engaging like in music, in the music industry even too, like artists know their consumers better than ever. And so how do they actually understand that and engage and create that moment? And because they understand what personalization of music means to the consumer and their brand as a musician means. And so how do you use that type of stuff to really make a difference in what you're doing and how you're connecting? I think those two aspects are super important for that.
And the product offerings. I know we had talked at one point about the cookie-free world, and once universally accepted practice for both brands and consumers, targeting via third-party cookies, this may be coming to an end. How are we going to start dealing with this lack of critical information that's been driving advertising and personalization?
Adam, do you want to go first on that, and then I'll build?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, the deadline keeps getting, it seems to be getting pushed back a little bit on this, right? There's been a little bit of wiggle room in that. But you know, the good news is that a lot of these companies are on this journey of first party data and getting that. And I would just add that the personalization thing is implicit that, you know, you want to make sure that that your data is not in silos. Right. So you've got it one place where everybody can access it. So the more that you get that first party data, the kind of richer view of the customer you can get through your direct engagements. Ameliorating that and adding to that with third party data is going to be trickier than it has in the past, right? There's building a good customer data platform where you can bring in some of this third party data. There's talk about some folks creating consortia of customer information to be shared across that, you know, have to make sure that all the privacy and all those issues are addressed in the creation of those. And then there's this really, you know, the latest buzzword that I'm hearing, at least in the media space, is this idea of the clean room, right? And this place where I can bring my data and somebody else brings their data, and in the clean room, it gets matched up and I can create marketing cohorts and things like this, but nobody knows what's, you know, so it's, and I'm talking about it's mystical. It's actually, it does work and it does happen, but it is very much this kind of buzzword that everybody's chasing now because they want the ability to do what they could do with cookies without cookies.
Yeah, that's true. And I think as you start to look at the different high-tech companies and advertising platforms and media platforms that are out there that are doing this and making these offerings happen, it's that workaround of we no longer can use this really. And you know, everybody sort of anchored on cookies for a long time. I'm not sure how really should have been as important as it was to everyone's you know, data profiles of consumers anyway. I mean, it provides some insight. It provides a lot, but it's like it was never meant to do what it was really doing for organizations. It kind of evolved into that, but then it truly became this thing that everyone became dependent on, right? Because it was the easy. And I think now it's not going to be so easy. It's now like, oh, well, making these investments in the customer data platforms like Adam's talking about is critical. Even going back as far as like looking where we're going back to more like direct mail paths and looking at how as a marketing organization we use direct mail so prevalently. How do we take some of those same concepts and re-embed them in our new more digital focused ways, and making the power of our ability to have first party data, have those connections, and then truly, like Adam was saying, is use the clean rooms that are coming about, that these entities are creating, to enable a better connection when you do place a digital media buy, and bringing it back into the clean room to make these marriages of data sets together to have better insights, or to better inform what you do from a media spend perspective and your channel strategy. I think those are all critical things, and I think it's just going to continue to evolve. I think the devices, even in and of themselves, like Apple is doing today with, you know, the restriction of who has access at the device level, is going to continue to evolve. I mean, not even what we're talking about from cookies, but where the device ID becomes something different, and there's going to be protection probably even further around that. And so what does that look like, and how does that impact what people use today in their identification of consumers, broadly speaking, as well as more individually speaking?
You know, your comments about the clean room bring to mind some issues that I've always had a challenge with, is how much work effort you really need to put into data governance to make that happen. Particularly if you're dealing with outside organizations. What are your thoughts about the kinds of practices media and entertainment companies need to undertake to make certain their data is clean enough to share in the clean room?
Yeah, well, I mean, in general, just the best practice of especially when you're asking and collecting directly, you know, asking for what you need, not for what you don't, or to put another way, make sure that it's a relationship in terms of the data exchange, right? That you're capturing stuff, and that if you do reach out and you ask for specific personal data, you do it in like a sequential way, or you collect this data in a sequential way where it makes sense, and it's not just kind of like, hey, tell me everything about you because I want to know it. There's got to be a value exchange. In terms of keeping it clean enough to leverage it in the clean room, it becomes tricky because depending on how opaque these things are, you don't know. This is where it becomes a real art and science, because what are you keying on, right? In terms of the data, like so if you don't know what's being put in there, how do you know what you want to make sure you've got the highest quality of? It's, I'm using a horrible example here, but it's probably not going to be social security numbers, right? It could, so what is the key value data that you want to make sure you've got completely correct to be able to take advantage of this third-party data? And as Tracie said, until we get it figured out in terms of a standard approach, you might actually have to do that differently for different clean rooms, consortia, relationships, just because we don't have a standard practice there. What I would say in terms of data government is really zooming out is, I think companies, media companies, all companies, but we're talking about media companies here, you need to really understand who needs the data, access to the data, and who needs the access to the insights. So, you can have a very small group of people who are the only people in the organization who see all of the information that you're talking about in terms of what you've got and what you might want to share. The rest of it is derivations, right? It's just derived insights off of that stuff. And that's where the business units and other folks come in. So I think it's still a challenge. I don't mean to kind of make it sound like it's easy, but that data governance group can be comparatively small, and arguably should be comparatively small compared to the analytics group that does all the work on top of that data.
And you just made a bunch of InfoSec people very, very happy, because you're following the principle of least access. So
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. I mean, they're loving that statement right now, right?
Yeah.
I think.
Exactly.
The other thing, I think when you think about data governance organizationally is an important conversation to Adam's point, right? It's like, in your organization, the who and the what is responsible, accountable, needs to be, have access or not have access, to what level, that is super important. I used to, whenever I was building data governance organizations in some major retailers and CPG clients, we always called it whose name's in the box, both from a functional business perspective and the data domain that we're talking about. So in the customer domain, who is truly in our names in the boxes, who owns and is accountable for the health and wellness and the usage of this information for that business function, and how does that make it like permeate through the rest of the organization, and what they do with that information, how it's used, how it's informing the decisions that they're making, and then what are the quality standards that they need it to hold to from a data quality perspective, but even also the risk and privacy and data standards that it needs to hold to for policy purposes. And so having this intersection of people in ownership, not owning the data, they have to own the data from a stewardship perspective. Like, you truly need to have people who understand what it means to steward data in your data governance organization. Without having data stewardship, you don't really have anyone who's accountable and responsible for making sure it stays healthy, stays clean, stays in a privacy compliant sort of way. And so, and it can help you manage risk as an organization, but also inform the insights team so that they are using it in the right way. I think the other big thing is to consider, and this has evolved over time. I think there's a new marriage of data governance with ethics and understanding the value of ethics in data and how it plays a role in what we do with data in our organizations and with the data. And so I think that's another thing that's going to continue to evolve in the data governance space. While it's important to have all the things that Adam talks about, and also identification of owners and stewards, I think understanding where ethics plays a role in what we do with data and how we use it is also a critical factor that I think is kind of building upon the data governance world today.
Yeah, I think those are all excellent points. The stewardship point in particular, I think, is interesting in the fact that without that level of stewardship, my personal belief is that your teams don't trust the data as much, and
Mhm.
therefore they want more access
Yeah.
to the raw data. And if you're going to keep that concept of least access privilege, that there has to be some level of trust in the results that are coming out, so that you're not grabbing all the data yourself and doing your own, doing all your own work with it. So,
And I
really
think it goes the other way as well. The ethics thing, and this is of course very oversimplified, but you use the example of great experiences. Like, as long as if the companies have a long-term view of this, once again, going from this disaggregated to this direct relationship, and now these customers are an asset. The direct relationship to these customers is an asset, and the goal is to, even if the goal is to maximize lifetime value, that's not necessarily that doesn't necessarily run afoul of ethics, as long as the lifetime value of that takes into account that it is a long relationship, right? You don't want to do anything early on that's going to destroy trust. You don't want to have a bad experience. You don't want to show somebody something that they wouldn't be interested in. I think there's actually a real potentially positive story here, is that the goals and the incentives are aligned, as long as everybody's got the right time frame or horizon to look at.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, we haven't talked about some of the more advanced technologies that are coming into play here. One I actually did want to ask about, and Tracie, you alluded to this a little bit earlier when we started talking about the consumer identity and what Apple's doing, for example. Any thoughts about how blockchain might play a role in this consumer analytics space, particularly given the fact that some would argue blockchain democratizes the ownership of data, and some of the books I've even read have talked about consumers charging companies for their personal data. How does that play into all of this?
Well, I mean, that really is truly a value exchange at that point. And then the consumer
Right.
gets to monetize their own data, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
I think to what I was saying earlier, I think, it's an interesting concept. It's one that I've a few years ago, blockchain was really on the hype cycle at the moment. It's still in and it was more coming to life, but it was really on its peak of hype.
Well,
and
we're starting to talk about more practical applications of
exactly.
it. So, yeah.
It's kind of like IoT was for a while, right?
Yeah.
And data in motion and things of that nature, which I think it's all kind of coming to another place in its cycle. But the thing I would say is, to answer that question, is it's very interesting to kind of see it all come together now, and the value that what you can strike with, like, looking at blockchain as a way and a mechanism, not just to have democratization, but like the tracking capability, the auditing capability of where and when it's utilized and pushed or pulled, right? And everyone is truly, like, we're really getting more visible. Now the question is, who has that visibility, where it sits, who has access? I mean, all that same type of information applies to the blockchain contract, but to have the mechanism to be able to do that at the data level. And oh, by the way, can also track the encryption, the decryption, when it occurs, how it occurs. It's all of those elements that blockchain will really add value to it. But I think, to your point, in mentioning, where, like with Apple and some of these other entities kind of restricting what they do identity-wise at the device level, these types of contracts that, and really blockchain is really about establishing a contract, a connectivity between two parties that are making this exchange happen, and creating it in such a way that, has authenticity and transparency connected to, like, rules and regulation around it, right? And I think that's the beauty of where trying to figure out how it will play a role will be critical. But I think there's the tech isn't quite 100% there from a customer perspective. Is really good for supply chain, because moving product or moving data packets and things of that nature aren't as difficult, but there is still some constraints within it. I think it'll be interesting to see how it can evolve, and then what the business model that will evolve around it for the consumer and the organizations that they do want to have a value exchange with. will be very, very interesting to see how it evolves. I think it's coming. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. And the tech catching up with it in some regards.
Yeah.
So my son and I successfully mined some Ethereum like a summer and a half ago, only to find out when we did the math that we lost more money on the electricity that we consumed during the mining than the actual. So yeah, I agree. It's very cool, very empowering. You know, there's that old saying, if the service is free, you're the product, right? And I think people, consumers, even of media, this is a big thing in healthcare now, recognizing that you actually are a consumer in this, right? And I think the same thing in media, you're a consumer. So having that power to say, you know, I'll give you my data, but I want something in exchange. I'll circle back to the music example earlier. I don't know if you guys are users of Spotify. Spotify sent me this email like a few months ago that said, you know, Adam's Spotify, and just all these things like, I'm the only person who listens to this and this, and you know, all of these fantastic little insights to my behaviors. I will absolutely give Spotify all my information because they give me something back, not just the music that I enjoy, but they give me back an experience that is actually very cool and is differentiating and all, you know, and that kind of stuff. So now if I were to get that experience and some money on top of it, sure, you know, I would sign up for it. So yeah, I think I'd like to see the consumer get a little bit more power in that space as well.
And I'd like the consumer to have a little bit more visibility into what happens to their data after Spotify uses it and shares it with someone else.
Yeah,
so
well,
yeah.
See,
Tracie, to your point about where the data ends up later.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, we're coming close on time, so I don't want to you know, extend too much longer, but I do want to ask one question. We talked when we met earlier about the increasing volumes of data. It's clear that machine learning and AI are really the way for us to be able to deal with these massive you know, increases in data volumes for the analytics side. Any thoughts about additional challenges or maybe even unique applications of AI machine learning that you're starting to see that we should all be watching out for?
So I'll jump in quickly. I mean, one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of from customers that I love on the content side is using AI and ML services to enhance metadata. So to get a better understanding of what's in your content and then mapping that to what the consumers enjoy. So once again, the Stars individual had said that they use it for buying decisions and all this other stuff. Exactly. But what's important is knowing what it is that's driving that enjoyment so that you can purchase that, not just at a title level, but at an actual asset level.
Yeah. And then I would just add that I think the use of it in understanding and applying it to ethics and our diversity and inclusion way of looking at, you know, who we target, when we target, how we target, who we're messaging with, and how we bring that to life. I think trying to remove those biases, but using AI and ML, because sometimes you know, even AI and ML can build, like you can train a model to do things that you probably shouldn't do, but being more aware of that, I think, is using AI and ML to make sure that our content and our marketing is more diverse, is more relevant to a broader set, is more inclusive of what we're trying to do with our brand and who we're connecting with. So I think we're going to see some of that evolution as part of that content development and the use of AI in it.
Yeah, and there's clearly an increased dialogue around algorithmic bias in that front. Having the right data training sets to feed your AI models. We could do a whole nother topic just on that, but unfortunately we're out of time. I'd love to invite people to some work that we're doing with Mesa later this year on a conference for similar topics, so we'll have to leave it for another day. But Adam, Tracie, thank you so much for your time. It was really enjoyable speaking with you. Love the insights and the comments. I think you've given us a lot to think about and a lot to look forward to as well. So